The next example, played at a slow time control, so there was plenty of time to think about what was going on, shows both sides ignoring all of these rules. I don't know about black, but white was familiar with these ideas. So this is probably a student of Selman's played by white. And so remember the rules: if you have a bad bishop that's acting like a tall pawn, you can either get the pawns off the color of the bishop, get your bishop outside the pawn chain, or exchange the bishop. Okay, so those are the rules. So we're going to see an example where the players don't follow these rules. This is Daniel S., rated 1823, versus Metapuff, rated 1938, on ICC, the Internet Chess Club, 2007. The opening was badly played by both sides. Don't pay much attention to it. Yeah, okay. Black was obviously used to people trying to swap their dark squared bishop for his, and apparently he had learned to avoid it with this little rook move. The idea is that bishop h6 can now be met by bishop h8, like that, when the rook would no longer be vulnerable to the white bishop on h6. So you see that in like the dragon and stuff. To the uninitiated, this might sound quite profound. However, it is also completely wrong. The truth is that, in this particular position, black should welcome the exchange of dark squared bishops with open arms. There are a couple of reasons for this, but the most pertinent is that the g7 bishop is a tall pawn that's trapped behind its chain. Yes, it does defend some squares, but all in all, it's a pretty ugly piece. This misconception on black's part rears its head again in a few moves. Rule: don't hesitate to exchange your bad pieces for the opponent's good ones. White also fails his bishop exam. Uh-oh. His g2 bishop isn't very happy, so white needs to activate the thing by getting it outside the pawn chain. Thus, bishop h3 is correct. Get your bishop outside the pawn chain. This not only stops the potential knight g4 moves, right here, after white, so like after white pushes their pawn f4, knight g4 would be an idea because this e3 square is weak. And so the bishop on h3 stops knight g4. But it also prevents black from posting a rook on the open c file. White is only thinking of mate, so less brutal ideas, like getting his bishop outside the pawn chain with bishop h3, are not entering. Oh, sorry. Rook c1, queen b6, f4. White is only thinking of mate, so less brutal ideas, like getting his bishop outside the pawn chain with bishop h3 instead of f4 for this move, are not entering his mind. Better was knight g4 heading for e3. I think it's really good that he's putting games like this on, because the best way for people from like the 1400 to kind of like 1800 rating range to improve is by looking at games and seeing similar mistakes to ratings around that level, because you don't necessarily learn as much from looking at Grandmaster games because they don't make the same types of mistakes, but I really think this is good that he's putting games of his students on, because really, like, you learn the most from your own games, because that's where you see your own weaknesses, and you got to build your way up to higher levels that way. So better was knight g4 heading for e3. f5. Bishop h3 is still screaming for attention. Would have been much better. f6. Bishop h6. Double question mark. Both sides are getting solid Fs in Bishop's 101. Bishop's 101, I wonder what colleges offer that course. It's probably a weed-out course. White needed to feel his g2 bishop's pain and play f takes g6, unlocking the h3 c8 diagonal. Yes, it sacrifices a piece, but this was now necessary thanks to White's blocking that diagonal with f5. Try not to entomb your own bishop behind its pawn chain. It turns out that the capture on g6 is very strong. F takes g6 when black has a few options here.
Check.
Trying to hide behind white's pawn. Another option is king takes. I love piece sacrifices. Tal has a great quote in one book about sacrificing a piece. The master sacrifices a piece, and then a few moves later, somehow the master gives checkmate. How does the master do it? Rook f7. Queen d8. Well, the book is The Art of the Checkmate, which I still haven't read yet, but just in case you're interested. It's actually called 1000 Checkmate Combinations by Victor Kenkin. Anyway. Queen to d8. Rook to c7. This is game over. Okay. So, king takes h8. Rook f7. Queen d8. Bishop h3. Knight c5. b4. Knight a6. Bishop to c8. Exclam. And this is devastating. So h takes g6 is another variation. Now bishop h3 is very strong. So obviously they take not check, because then I think if check, then rook takes is probably good for black. But this is very strong for white. Okay. So another line would be queen to d8.
Check.
This is a really good game for tactics too. With the winning attack for white. Okay, so let's go through the actual game. Bishop h6, which someone gives a double question mark. Notice the huge role White's ignored light squared bishop plays in all of these variations. Bishop h8, double question mark. This is very funny. Poor Metapuff, whose Metapuff is the screen name for the player playing black, poor Metapuff is still trying to retain his tall pawn. Instead, g5, exclam. Bishop takes g7, king takes g7, shines a very different light on the position. In that case, black wisely got rid of his inactive bishop while keeping white's f-pawn on f5, thereby turning the g2 bishop into a tall pawn. The resulting situation is very comfortable for black, who has a safe king and enjoys a knight in a close position versus an inactive white bishop. F takes g6. Suddenly white wakes up and smells the stagnating bishops. H takes g6. Bishop h3. h4 followed by bishop h3 is probably even more accurate. Nevertheless, bishop h3 here proved more than adequate to turn the tide permanently in white's favor. The rest of the game is worth looking at just so you can see how strong a bishop can become if you manage to get it outside the pawn chain.
Check.
Oh man, white's down a pawn. I'd like to apologize in advance for any jokes I might make in the future. If you didn't notice, that was a joke when I said white's down a pawn, because they're up way more than a pawn here. Even though materially they're down 2 pawns. So that's another section of these of this book is the initiative and material imbalances. So you can be down material even a few pieces, and depending on the position, it's sometimes the initiative is more important.
Check. 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 Check.
Let's see what would have happened. Yeah, if here, then
Check.
this is winning. That's the sound of checkmate.
Check.
Rook f7 checkmates. Bishop g7.
Check. Check.
Never understood why people even bother with that.
Check.
Okay. 1-0. This just goes to show that knowing strategic concepts in a theoretical sense is one thing, while being able to actually notice it and put it into use in a real battle situation is quite another. And make no mistake about it, this inability to turn knowledge into practical application goes right up the rating ladder. One student during our first lesson, rated 2150 FIDE, got angry when I began talking about the proper use of minor pieces. He said I already know all that stuff. Yet as we went through his games, he would fail to implement any of it. Instead of treating his minor pieces right, he would constantly get sidetracked by more important thoughts, such as material or attack, etc. Naturally, when he lost to superior players, he rarely understood what went wrong. To cure this illness, you need to learn the basic ideas and concepts given in this book. Reinforce the information by constant repetition. Try to solve as many chess problems as possible that are devoted to imbalances. Go through your own games and make a serious effort to spot where you could have improved the life of your minor pieces.